The chair was metal. That's the first thing I noticed. It was a cold, hard, folding metal chair, the kind you use for extra seating at a garage sale, tucked into the far corner of the hotel kitchen. And it was for me. At my only son's wedding reception. A single bead of condensation dripped slowly down the side of a towering stainless steel refrigerator next to me, tracing a path through a faint smear of something. In that moment, with the clatter of pans and the shouted orders of chefs as my soundtrack, I made my decision. My heart, which had been fluttering like a trapped bird, went still. I would smile. I would stay quiet. And then, I would cancel everything. If this emotional story already has your attention, please tap, like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. I read every city, and it truly makes this feel like a shared journey. My name is Evelyn. For 58 years, my life has been built on quiet, sturdy things. Not flashy things, not loud things. The steady, rhythmic click, click, click of my knitting needles, a sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. The reliable, comforting hum of the washing machine on a Tuesday morning, a promise of order and cleanliness. The deep, simple pleasure of sinking my fingers into the rich, dark soil of my garden, of nurturing a tomato seedling from a fragile green tendril into a plant heavy with fruit. These were my symphonies, my accomplishments. For 23 of those years, my world was my son, Leo. His father, Robert, was a kind man, a librarian with gentle hands and a love for mystery novels. He was a quiet soul, like me. Our love was a comfortable sweater, warm and familiar. When he passed suddenly from a heart attack when Leo was just 8, a part of my world solidified into a quiet, permanent sorrow. But another part hardened into a fierce, focused determination. It was just Leo and me. We were a team, a unit of 2 against the world. We lived in a cozy, slightly worn-in townhouse on Maple Drive. The wallpaper in the hallway had a tiny, repeating fleur-de-lis pattern that I'd grown to love. The third step on the staircase creaked in a specific, friendly way. It was a home filled with love, but also with the visible signs of a tight budget. We were masters of the gentle art of making do. I worked as a receptionist at Dr. Albright's family dental practice. The pay was modest, but the hours were regular, and Dr. Albright was a decent man who let me leave early when Leo had a school play. The job paid our mortgage, kept the lights on, and put food on our simple, sturdy oak table. I taught Leo the value of things, not the price tag, but the real value. The value of a promise kept, which is the foundation of trust. The value of showing up for someone when they're sick, which is the currency of care. The value of looking someone in the eye when you speak to them, which is the mark of respect. We had a ritual. Every Friday night, we'd have fancy dinner. It was usually just boxed macaroni and cheese or homemade pizza. But we'd light a candle, put a cloth napkin on our laps, and talk about our weeks. It was our sacred time. He was a good boy, thoughtful, with his father's curious mind and my own cautious nature. When he got his first job at the Bean There coffee shop at 16, he brought home pastries at the end of his shift. Croissants a little squashed, muffins missing a chunk where he'd sampled them. He'd present them on a chipped plate with such pride, and to me, they tasted better than anything from a 5-star bakery. We celebrated his university acceptance letter with store-brand chocolate chip ice cream, sitting on our porch swing as the fireflies blinked around us. He talked about studying engineering, about building things. I saw the future in his eager eyes, and it looked bright and honest. Then, in his final year of university, he met Chloe. She was like a firework in our quiet night sky. Sudden, dazzling, impossible to ignore. She had a laugh that was a clear, ringing bell and an energy that seemed to vibrate the air around her. She came from a different universe. Her father, Charles Delaney, was a property developer. Her mother, Patricia, chaired charity galas. The one time I was invited to their home for a casual family dinner, I felt like I'd walked onto a movie set. Everything was oversized, gleaming, and pale. White sofas that looked like no one ever sat on them. A piece of modern art on the wall that looked, to my untrained eye, like a violent swirl of black and red paint. The cutlery was so heavy, it felt alien in my hand. Chloe was perfectly, politely sweet to me in the beginning. She'd compliment my cooking, though I noticed she'd push the hearty beef stew around her bowl, eating only the carrots. She called me Mrs. G, never Evelyn, and certainly not any version of Mom. It was a tiny, formal distance, a pane of glass between us. But I brushed it off. Leo's eyes shone when he looked at her. He walked taller. He was in love, and for that, I was grateful. I wanted his happiness more than I wanted my own comfort. The engagement, just 6 months later, felt like a whirlwind picking up our quiet Maple Drive life and threatening to scatter it. Leo came over, breathless, and showed me the ring. The diamond was a brilliant, cold stone so large it seemed to swallow the light from my humble kitchen lamp. It looked incongruous in his familiar, slightly calloused hand. My stomach did a slow, cold somersault. It wasn't jealousy. It was the quiet, screaming voice of practicality. How on earth? He was a graduate student living on loans and a part-time research assistant's stipend. I knew the balance of his bank account, the one I still helped him budget, down to the last dollar. But I saw the sheer, unadulterated joy on his face, the boy hoping for approval. So I swallowed the questions. I told myself stories. Maybe he'd secretly saved. Maybe it was a family heirloom from her side, reset. I hugged him tightly, the wool of his sweater scratchy against my cheek. "I'm so happy for you, my love," I whispered, and I meant it. I was. I just didn't understand the world this happiness was going to require. The wedding planning began, and almost immediately, the gentle, familiar current of my life with Leo began to shift, to pull me toward a foreign and treacherous shore. Chloe had a vision. This was a word I heard constantly. The vision was a minimalist luxury wedding at the historic Glenwood Hotel. When she first said the estimated cost per head for the dinner, a number that sounded like a monthly mortgage payment, I actually felt my knees go weak. I had to put a hand on the back of my kitchen chair. It was more, significantly more, than I had paid as a down payment on my townhouse. Leo saw my face. He came over, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "It's okay, Mom," he said, but his voice had a strained, high-pitched quality I'd never heard before. "We'll figure it out. The Delaneys, they want to help." A week later, he came over alone. It was a Tuesday, our old mac and cheese night, though we hadn't observed that ritual in months. He sat at our oak table, his fingers tracing the familiar grain of the wood where he'd once carved his initials as a teenager. "Mom," he began, not looking at me. "Chloe's parents, they've made an incredibly generous offer. They want to cover the majority of the wedding, the venue, the catering, the band, all the big-ticket items." A wave of relief washed over me. "Oh, Leo, that's wonderful. That takes so much pressure off you two." "Yeah," he said, but the word was heavy. There's a condition, though." "What condition?" I asked, the relief curdling slightly. "They want to handle the planning, all of it, the invitations, the florist, every detail. They have very specific tastes. Patricia has an event planner she's used for years." He finally looked up, his eyes pleading for me to understand, to make this easy. It's how they do things." I felt a small, sharp pang of disappointment. I had quietly dreamed of helping him plan his wedding, of tasting cake samples together, laughing at the too sweet frosting. of folding napkins late into the night, sharing a pot of tea. Those mother-son moments were being gently, firmly taken off the table. But for his sake, I smiled. That's very generous of them. It will free you up to just enjoy being engaged. He nodded, looking down again. There's just one more thing. They'd like the financial contributions to be clear, to avoid any confusion or awkwardness on the day. He took a deep breath. Since they're covering the main events, they suggested that maybe you could handle some of the smaller things, the more personal touches. My heart, foolish thing, lifted a little. Personal touches? That sounded like me. That sounded like something I could pour my love into. Of course, Leo. I'd be honored. What did you have in mind? He pulled a sheet of paper from his backpack. It wasn't his usual lined notebook paper. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock. At the top, in elegant script, it read, "Items for maternal contribution." My title was not Mother of the Groom. I was a maternal contributor. The list was meticulous. Guest welcome bags, conceptualization, sourcing, assembly. Budget, $2,500 photo booth props and backdrop. Budget, $1,200 late-night snack station, concept and execution. Budget, $3,000 transportation for bridal party to venue, morning of. Budget, $800 vintage car send-off for bride and groom. Budget, $2,500. At the bottom was a total. A number that stole the air from my lungs. It represented my entire rainy day savings. The money I'd painstakingly set aside from the dental office over 15 years. Money for a new roof when the shingles finally gave out. Money for emergencies. Money for my own someday when I might not be able to work. I looked from the paper to my son's face. He looked hopeful, anxious, and deeply, deeply uncomfortable. I saw the man he was trying to become, and the boy who used to bring me squashed pastries. I thought of the glass jar we used to keep on this very counter, saving coins for his college. I thought of the value of things, of promises, of showing up. My voice, when it came, was thick but clear. Consider it done. The months that followed were a strange, disorienting dance where I was constantly 2 steps behind, stumbling over rules I didn't know existed. I was given a palette, dusty sage, blush, and gold accent, and a list of approved vendors. My ideas, offered tentatively, were gently, then firmly, shot down. It was a masterclass in passive dismissal. I suggested baking my famous oatmeal chocolate chip cookies for the welcome bags. I could make them in batches, wrap them in cellophane with a ribbon. "Oh, that's so sweet, Evelyn," Patricia said during one of our now weekly video calls, her face a mask of polite horror on my computer screen. "But we've already sourced these exquisite lavender and honey macarons from Pâtisserie du Soleil in the city. They align perfectly with the vision. Perhaps you could include a nice tea bag in the bag instead." The simple, distressed white picture frames I'd collected from thrift stores over months, planning to let guests snap Polaroids and leave them as instant favors, were deemed too rustic. "We've ordered custom acrylic ones with their monogram and wedding date laser-etched," Chloe explained with a patient sigh, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a child. "It's more cohesive." I felt like a clumsy, well-meaning guest who kept bringing the wrong dish to a potluck. I was spending my life's careful savings, writing check after check, on things I had no real ownership of, on items that felt impersonal, cold, and achingly expensive. But I kept my mouth sealed shut. I smiled. I nodded. I signed the checks. Every approved item was triple the price of anything I would have found. A bag of gourmet coffee beans for the welcome bags cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Leo became a ghost in the process. Our weekly calls dwindled. When we did talk, his voice was harried, distant. He was a man pulled in 2 directions, and I could feel him, cell by cell, drifting into the gravitational pull of the Delaney world. Our conversations became logistical briefings. Mom, did you confirm the linen color for the snack station? Mom, the transport company needs the final headcount by Tuesday. Less and less of, "How are you, Mom?" Less and less of the shared, quiet understanding that had been our language for 2 decades. The final guest list arrived by email. My family, my sister Margaret, her husband, my 2 dearest friends from the dental office, Carol and Jean, were all grouped at table 12, which the attached floor plan showed was at the very back of the ballroom, tucked beside the double doors that led to the kitchen. Leo's childhood best friend, Jake, the boy who'd eaten at my table 3 nights a week for years, who'd called me Mommy, was not on the list at all. When I called Leo, my voice trembling, he answered on the first ring, sounding irritated. "Mom, I'm in a lab meeting." "Leo, Jake isn't on the list." A long pause, the muffled sound of him walking. The Delaneys had a strict list from their side. We hit the venue capacity. It was a numbers game. "A numbers game?" I echoed, my heart cracking for Jake and for the memory of the 2 boys sleeping in a tent in our backyard. "He's your best friend." "It's complicated, Mom," he said, and I could hear the defensive wall going up. "Chloe's parents are paying for most of this. They have business associates they have to invite. It's just how it is." He hung up soon after. I sat at my kitchen table, the one we'd bought at a yard sale and stripped and sanded together. And I cried silent, angry tears. Not just for Jake, for us. For the value of things that clearly held no value in this new equation. The wedding week arrived in a flurry of forwarded emails and last-minute directives. I was instructed, to come to the Glenwood Hotel a day early to oversee the setup and placement of all my contributed items. I arrived, tired from a full day at the dental office, carrying a box of last-minute, dusty sage ribbons I'd tracked down in 3 different craft stores. The grand ballroom was a symphony of controlled chaos. Men in black were constructing lavish floral arches dripping with white orchids and pale green hydrangeas. A string quartet was tuning in a corner, the sound sweet and fragile against the noise. The tables gleamed with crystal and silver. And there, in the place of honor on a separate draped table, was the wedding cake. It was an architectural marvel of fondant and sugar flowers, 5 tiers high, breathtaking. And there, on an elegant framed placard beside it, in flowing gold script, it read, "The wedding cake, generously provided by the bride's family." I stopped dead, my box of ribbons suddenly heavy as a stone. The air left my lungs. I had written a check for half of that cake. It had been a line item on my maternal contribution sheet. A significant line item. Patricia had told me it was vital. I cover part of it to feel invested. A cold, sharp clarity cut through the months of foggy, willing compliance. This wasn't about avoiding confusion. This wasn't about clarity. This was a careful, deliberate erasure. My financial contribution was welcome. My name, my presence as the groom's mother, was not. I must have stood there for 5 minutes, just staring. The noise of the ballroom faded to a buzz. Later that evening, after the rehearsal dinner, a stiff, formal affair where I was seated at the end of a long table, struggling to make conversation with Chloe's great-aunt, I found Leo alone. He was in the now quiet dining room, under the soft glow of a single chandelier, checking place cards at the head table. "Leo?" I said, my voice calm but so quiet it seemed to get lost in the vast room. He jumped. "Mom, you scared me. What's up?" "The cake placard. It only thanks your in-laws." He didn't look up from the cards. He rearranged a few, his movements jerky. "Mom, come on. It's not a big deal. It's just a sign." "Patricia, she's very detail-oriented. She probably just had it made that way." It's simpler. Simpler, I repeated. The word was a pebble dropped into the still pool of the room. It rippled outwards. It wasn't simpler for me. It was a lie. A polite, gold-embossed lie. A public dismissal of my sacrifice, my place. I looked at my son, my only child, in the half-light. He was bathed in the opulent glow of the chandelier, but he looked small. He was avoiding my gaze, his shoulders hunched under an invisible weight I now understood wasn't just wedding stress. It was the weight of shame. Shame for my modest world. Shame for the smallness of my contribution in their eyes. Shame for me. In that moment, something final broke inside me. Not with a snap, but with a silent, definitive release. Like the last thread holding a precious, familiar painting to the wall, giving way. The picture of my son and my place in his life fell and shattered on the floor. The wedding day dawned with a sky of flawless, heartbreaking blue. A perfect day. I dressed with deliberate care in my mother of the groom dress. I'd chosen a simple sheath-style dress in a soft lavender. I'd altered it myself, taking it in at the waist, letting the hem down just a touch. It was elegant in its simplicity. I looked fine, appropriate. I did not look like I belonged to the world of chiffon and diamonds, of silk gloves and statement jewelry that was swirling through the bridal suite, its laughter echoing down the hotel corridor. The ceremony was held in the hotel's garden pavilion. It was visually stunning. A string quartet played Pachelbel's canon. Chloe was a vision in a gown that seemed woven from moonlight. Leo stood at the altar, handsome in his tailored tuxedo. But as he watched her walk toward him, his smile was wide, fixed, and directed at the crowd. It didn't reach his eyes, which held a glassy, performative sheen. When he kissed her at the end, the applause was thunderous, a wave of sound. I clapped until my hands ached, tears streaming down my face. Not just tears of joy, but of loss. For the son I felt I was watching marry not just a woman, but an entire way of life that had no room for me. The reception began with a cocktail hour in a lavishly appointed anteroom. I felt adrift. Everyone seemed to know everyone else. Clusters of people talking about stocks, vacation homes, mutual friends with names like Bunny and Trip. I found my sister Margaret. She hugged me tightly, her familiar rose-scented perfume a momentary anchor. "You look beautiful, Evie," she whispered in my ear. "Just hold on." We were finally ushered into the main ballroom. It was breathtaking in a cold, museum-like way. Everything was perfect, coordinated, and expensive. Our little band, Margaret, her husband Tom, Carol, and Jean, found table 12. It was exactly where the map said, the last table, tucked against the wall, right next to the swinging doors to the kitchen. Every time a server pushed through, a burst of heat and noise and the clatter of dishes washed over us. But we made the best of it. We were survivors at our little outpost. We laughed at our predicament. Carol made a joke about having the best access to the food. Jean shared a flask of something medicinal in her clutch. For a little while, surrounded by their warm, familiar faces, I forgot the tension gnawing at my insides. The dinner was served. Tiny, exquisite portions of seared scallops, deconstructed beef Wellington, microgreens arranged like little forests. We ate. We talked about our lives, our gardens, our work. We were having our own lovely, defiant party in the corner. After the main course was cleared, just as the band was starting up for the first dance, the wedding planner appeared at my shoulder. She was a sleek woman in a black dress, a headset curling around her ear like a technological serpent. "Mrs. G?" she said with a professional, impersonal smile. "The bride would like a word with you." A flicker of hope, stupid and persistent, sparked in my chest. Maybe Chloe wanted a photo. Maybe, in the glow of being newly married, She wanted to thank me, to bridge the gap. I excused myself from my friends and followed the planner. We weaved through the laughing, dancing crowds. We passed the head table. Leo was there, leaning back in his chair, laughing uproariously at a story his new father-in-law, Charles, was telling, slapping the table. He didn't see me. We walked right past the ballroom's main doors, into the brightly lit, echoing hallway, and then, with a push of a heavy door, into the vast, steaming, cacophonous heart of the hotel kitchen. The contrast was violent. From soft music and murmured conversations to the roaring blast of industrial dishwashers, the sharp hiss of steam, the frantic shouts of "Order fire!" and "Pick up on Station 3!" The air was thick with the smell of seared meat, garlic, and underlying bleach. And there, against a wall of gleaming stainless steel ovens, were two metal folding chairs, just like the one from my hook. They were shoved against a prep table littered with vegetable scraps. Chloe stood beside them, backlit by the harsh kitchen fluorescence. Her wedding gown was almost blinding. She was still radiant, but her smile was a tight, practiced curve. "Evelyn," she said, her voice a saccharine sing-song over the kitchen din. "There's been a tiny, tiny issue. We're overcount at the main tables. It seems a few of the wedding party's plus ones didn't get the memo about no extra guests." She gave that light, tinkling laugh, the one that felt like ice chips down my spine. "It's all so chaotic, you know? To avoid any awkward shuffling during the parent dances and toasts, we thought the simplest solution would be for you and your two friends from table 12 to just slip in here for that little bit. Just for 30 minutes or so, you'll have a perfect view of everything." She gestured grandly to a small, old television monitor mounted high on the wall near the ceiling. It was dusty, the screen flickering slightly, showing a grainy, black-and-white feed from a security camera pointed at the ballroom dance floor. You could just make out blurry shapes moving. I stared. I looked at the metal chair, cold and institutional. I looked at the monitor, offering a thief's eye view of my own son's wedding. I looked back at Chloe's expectant, triumphant face. All of it, the corrected cookies, the rejected frames, the hidden check for the cake, the exiled guest list, the relegated table, it all crashed together in a single, crystal-clear understanding. This was not a mistake. This was not an oversight. This was the final, unambiguous message. I was not a guest of honor. I was a logistical problem, a supplier of funds and labor, to be utilized and then neatly tucked away when the real celebration, the Delaney celebration, began. A firestorm of humiliation, anger, and profound grief ignited in my chest. It threatened to choke me, to make me scream, to crumple me onto that awful metal chair in a heap of lavender silk. But then I saw the bead of condensation on the giant refrigerator next to me. It gathered at a seam, fattened, and began its slow, inevitable descent down the sterile steel. It was a tiny, pointless event in the chaotic universe of the kitchen. And it was the anchor I needed. My heart, which had been hammering a frantic, wild rhythm against my ribs, slowed. The noise of the kitchen faded to a distant roar. My breathing deepened. I saw my life's savings, gone. I saw my son's averted eyes. I saw the cold, hard truth of the metal chair. And I smiled. It was a real smile, born of a terrible, calm certainty. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice steady, almost warm. "Don't give it another thought. We'll be perfectly fine right here." Her smile widened into one of genuine, relieved victory. She'd done it. She'd managed the problem. "Oh, wonderful. I knew you'd understand. You're always so accommodating." She touched my arm briefly, a patronizing pat, then turned and floated out of the kitchen, the door swinging shut behind her, muffling the joyful noise of the party she was returning to. I did not sit down. I stood in the humming, alien landscape of the kitchen, watching that bead of water trace its path. The kitchen staff, a young man carving meat and a woman plating desserts, glanced at me with quick, pitying looks before turning hastily back to their work. I was a spectacle. The mother in the kitchen, a piece of the day's awkward logistics. I took out my phone from my small clutch. My hands, to my own surprise, were perfectly steady. I had planned for a rainy day. I had not planned for a flash flood that washed away the very ground beneath my feet. But as I stood there, a plan, cold, precise, and utterly dignified, formed in my mind with the clarity of that single drop of water. It wasn't born of rage, though rage was there. It wasn't about revenge, though the desire to make them feel something was sharp. It was about boundaries. It was about the fundamental value of a person. And in that moment, I understood the value of what I had left. My self-respect, my autonomy, and the immense, quiet power of a deliberate, final no. I walked out of the kitchen, not back towards the ballroom, but down a dim, silent service corridor lined with stacked chairs and cases of soda. I found a quiet alcove near a service elevator and the staff restrooms. The muffled thump of the bass from the band was a distant, ironic heartbeat. I needed one piece of information to confirm the hypothesis forming in my mind. With a deep, centering breath, I called the number for Classique Coach, the luxury vintage car service. I had booked and paid for it as my final grand gesture. A pristine, cream-colored 1961 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud to whisk the newlyweds from the hotel to the luxurious airport hotel where they were spending their first night before flying to Bali. It had been the last and largest check I'd written from my drained account. A final splash of love, of wanting to give them a storybook send-off. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. Classique Coach, Robert speaking. Hello, Robert. I'm calling to confirm a booking for this evening. For the Glenwood Hotel, under the name Grant, Leo and Chloe Grant. Ah, yes, he said, the sound of keyboard clicks in the background. The 11 p.m. pickup, the Silver Cloud. Everything is confirmed. And the drop-off location is still the grandiose suites at the International Airport? I asked, keeping my voice light, conversational. Actually, Robert said, we received an update from the groom this afternoon. The drop-off has been changed. The car is now to take them directly to the Eastfield Private Airfield. Instructions are to meet a Mr. Delaney's plane there. Mr. Delaney. Chloe's father. They weren't going to the airport hotel I'd paid for. They were flying privately to Bali, a plane I knew with a sickening, absolute certainty that Charles Delaney had provided. My beautiful, expensive car was now just a short, fancy taxi ride to a private jet. A convenience, a footnote. But that wasn't the blow. The blow was the timing. Leo had changed the booking. This afternoon, after the ceremony, after he had seen me, after he had presumably been informed of or agreed to the plan to seat me in the kitchen. He had my phone number. He had 5 seconds to send a text. Mom, we got a ride on her dad's plane. You can cancel the car. He didn't. He had let me waste that money, that last significant sum, without a thought. He had simply absorbed my final gift into the machinery of their lavish plan, making it a trivial, rerouted line item. The last illusion, the last fragile hope that my son was merely a pressured bystander, shattered into a million icy shards. This was active. This was complicit. He was making choices, clear, calculated choices that involved erasing my contributions, my presence, to secure his seamless entry into the Delaney world. The pain was so immense it was almost abstract, a white-hot ball of agony in my center. But it was also, finally, clarifying. It cut through all the fog, all the excuses, all the, that's just how they are. The person I needed to set boundaries with wasn't just a privileged bride and her overbearing parents, it was my own child. I walked back into the kitchen. The same staff members were there. I gave them a small, polite nod, as if I were a supervisor on a routine check. And then, I did something that felt both radical and inevitable. I sat down on the cold metal chair. I arranged the skirt of my lavender dress. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. I even looked up at the grainy monitor for a few minutes. On the screen, the toasts had begun. Charles Delaney stood at the microphone, commanding, expansive. His speech was about legacy, about new chapters, about the merging of families. He welcomed Leo to the Delaney family. He did not mention the Gray family. He did not mention me. Then Leo stood up. He looked nervous. He thanked the Delaneys for their incredible, overwhelming generosity. He thanked his new in-laws for welcoming me into your amazing family. He stammered, looked out at the blurry crowd on the monitor, and said, "And thanks to everyone for coming. It means a lot." He sat down. He did not say, "my mother." He did not say, "Evelyn." He did not say, "Mom." A profound, unexpected peace settled over me, cold and clean as mountain air. The decision was made. The hurt was a deep, dull ache that I knew would be with me for years, but the frantic anxiety, the desperate hope, the choking confusion, they were gone. They had burned away in the clarity of that kitchen. Action, calm and deliberate, replaced despair. I took out my phone again. First, I called Classique Coach back. Robert answered. "Robert, it's me again, regarding the grant booking. There's been another change of plans. Please cancel the 11 p.m. pickup entirely." "Oh, is there an issue?" "No issue," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "The couple have made other arrangements. You can release the car. I'll need to charge a 50% cancellation fee, as it's within 6 hours," he said apologetically. "That's perfectly fine," I replied. I did not ask for a refund for the original booking. I simply terminated the transaction. Let them figure out their own ride to the airfield. The loss was a price I was now willing to pay for my own freedom. Next, I opened my banking app. Over the past months, for ease, I had transferred money from my savings into a joint account I still shared with Leo. We'd opened it when he was 16, for his first part-time job. It was where I'd deposited money for his textbooks, for his first apartment deposit. It was supposed to be a bridge between us. It was now empty, a dry riverbed, the funds having flowed out to various wedding vendors. But the account was still open. I had paid most vendors by check or direct wire from this account. But for the largest single remaining obligation, the luxury honeymoon package to Bali, flights, villa, private tours, I had put down a substantial deposit using my personal credit card, with the final balloon payment of nearly $15,000 due to be automatically charged to that same card in 3 business days, the Monday after the wedding. The travel agency, Azure Escapes, had required a credit card on file for incidentals and final balance. I found their confirmation email, and I began to draft a new one. I was methodical. I addressed it to the main contact at Azure Escapes, and I CC'd the disputes department of my credit card company. My language was precise, polite, and unassailable. "Dear Ms. Laurent," I wrote, "please consider this written notice that I am hereby withdrawing my authorization for any and all future charges to my credit card, ending in well related to booking reference AE 33489 for the Bali Nirvana honeymoon package for Mr. and Mrs. Leo Grant. The initial deposit was made as a gift, and I do not dispute that charge. However, I will not be responsible for the remaining balance. The circumstances of the wedding have changed significantly. The beneficiaries have made alternative private travel arrangements, as was confirmed today with their transport service. My involvement as a financial contributor was based on a specific understanding of my role and inclusion in the event, which was not honored. Please direct all future inquiries and invoices for the outstanding balance to the wedding couple directly, or to the bride's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Delaney, who have been the primary architects and beneficiaries of the wedding planning. My participation, both financial and participatory, is now concluded. Thank you for your understanding. Sincerely, Evelyn Gray. I read it twice. Then I hit send. The whoosh sound was immensely satisfying. Next, I called my credit card company. I navigated the automated menu, then spoke to a representative. I need to place a block on any future charges from a specific merchant, I explained, my voice calm and firm. The merchant is Azure Escapes. I have just sent them a revocation of authorization, but I want to ensure no charges slip through. There is a dispute pending. The representative asked a few questions, heard the steadiness in my voice, and complied. The block is in place, Mrs. Gray. Finally, I opened my text messages. I looked at the last few from Leo, all logistics. I started a new one. I didn't write a novel. I didn't express my hurt. That was mine to carry, not his to dismiss. The words were simple, final, and kind in their own way. I hope you're having a beautiful night. I've left the reception. All my contributions, financial and otherwise, are now complete. I love you, Mom. I did not wait for the typing bubbles to appear. I did not wait for a reply. I put my phone back in my clutch. I stood up from the metal chair. I smoothed the wrinkles from my lavender dress. I walked past the kitchen staff, who this time didn't even look up. I pushed through the heavy service door, down the corridor, and out a side exit that smelled of old cigarettes and dumpsters. The cool night air hit my face, a shocking, delicious relief after the stifling heat of the kitchen and the ballroom. The sounds of the party were a dull, rhythmic throb in the distance, like a heartbeat fading. I walked to the far end of the parking lot, where my sensible 10-year-old Honda Civic waited. I got in. The familiar scent of the lemon-scented tree air freshener and old upholstery wrapped around me like a hug. I started the engine, and I drove away from the Glenwood Hotel in a silence so profound and peaceful it felt sacred. The fallout was not a dramatic explosion. It was a slow, quiet leak of tension, of withheld communication. For 3 days, my phone was a silent brick. I did not pace. I did not wring my hands. I went about the rhythm of my life with a new, detached focus. I watered my garden, noticing the first tiny green tomatoes forming. I finished a complicated cable knit pattern for a sweater I'd been putting off. I went to work at the dental office, soothed by its mundane routines, scheduling appointments, sterilizing instruments, chatting with patients about the weather. The quiet in my townhouse was different. It wasn't the anxious quiet of waiting for my son to call. It was the deep, resonant quiet after a long and terrible storm has finally passed. On the afternoon of the 4th day, a Tuesday, my doorbell rang. I was in the middle of repotting a fern. I wiped my earthy hands on my apron and looked through the peephole. Leo stood on my porch. He was alone. He looked like he hadn't slept. His clothes were rumpled, and the confident, polished groom was gone, replaced by a young man who looked lost. He held his phone in his hand like a weapon he didn't know how to use. I opened the door. Leo. Mom? He said, his voice flat, exhausted. We need to talk. Come in, I said, stepping back. Old habits, deep grooves. I automatically moved toward the kitchen. I'll put the kettle on. He didn't follow me to sit at the table. He paced the small living room, his presence too large, too agitated for the calm space. He picked up a framed photo of us at his high school graduation, then put it down abruptly. The travel agency, he began, not looking at me. Azure Escapes. They called Chloe's parents. They're furious. They said you canceled. that you're refusing to pay the balance. They're demanding we pay it, or they'll cancel the whole trip and keep the deposit. I poured boiling water into 2 mugs. His old, world's best son mug I'd bought him as a joke years ago, and my plain white one. I canceled my authorization for the balance, I corrected gently, carrying them in. The balance is not mine to pay. You changed the car service to go to a private airfield. To your father-in-law's plane. You clearly had other, more elaborate arrangements already in place. My financial participation was based on the original plan we agreed to. That plan changed. So did my obligations. He finally stopped pacing and stared at me, his eyes wide with a kind of bewildered anger. It was a gift. You can't just take back a gift. You gave it to us. The deposit was a gift, I agreed, placing his mug on the coffee table. He ignored it. The remaining $15,000 was an obligation I accepted under a specific set of understandings. Understandings that were not just broken, Leo. They were publicly mocked. I was told my contributions would be acknowledged. I was told I would have a place at my son's wedding. Not a metal folding chair in a kitchen, watching my own replacement on a security monitor. His face flushed a deep, mottled red. That was a mistake. A last-minute seating mix-up. Chloe was mortified when she found out. She cried. Was she? I asked, my voice still low and even. I took a slow sip of my tea. The familiar warmth was grounding. Was she mortified when the cake placard only thanked her parents for the cake I paid half for? Was it a mix-up when every person I love was exiled to table 12 by the kitchen doors? Was it a mistake when you changed the car service without a word to me, letting me throw away that money? You are my son. I have loved you since before you took your first breath. But I am not a bank, and I am not someone to be hidden away when the important pictures are being taken. His defiance crumbled. He sank onto the sofa, as if his legs could no longer hold him, and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook, but no sound came out. When he finally spoke, his voice was muffled by his palms. They're demanding I pay it. Chloe she's hysterical. She says she's humiliated. Her father says if I don't make it right, if I can't even handle this, it calls into question my ability to provide for his daughter, to be a part of their family. I sat in the armchair across from him, the one Robert used to love. I waited. I let the weight of his words hang in the air between us, in the room where he'd learned to walk. And what do you think, Leo? I asked, finally. My voice was softer now. Forget what they are saying. What do you think is right? The silence that followed was long and thick. The only sound was the loyal ticking of the grandmother clock in the hallway, a wedding gift to my own mother. He was struggling, truly struggling, not with me, but with the 2 versions of himself warring inside him. Finally, he lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed. I think I've messed up. Really, really badly. It was the first completely honest, unvarnished thing he'd said to me in over a year. A piece of my frozen heart thawed, just a little, at that honesty. But it did not change my position. The mess, I said, placing my mug down on the side table with a soft, definitive click, is not mine to clean up. I have cleaned up enough. I have paid, in money, in silence, in dignity, for your new life. My savings account is empty. My part is done. You are a married man. You made choices, actively and passively. Now you live with the cost of them. And I don't just mean the financial cost, I mean the real cost. He looked at me then, a confusion of emotions on his face. Anger, fear, shame, and a dawning, horrible understanding. What do I do? He asked, his voice that of the little boy who'd skinned his knee and run to me for a bandage. That, I said, standing up, a signal that this conversation, this part of our journey, was over is for you to figure out. You and your wife. It is the first of many problems you will solve together. My door is here. My love for you is here. But my wallet and my willingness to be treated as an afterthought are closed. He left that day, the chasm between us wider and deeper than the Grand Canyon. The Delaney's, after much bluster, paid the honeymoon balance. To them, $15,000 was an annoyance, a line item. To me, it had been my security. The irony was not lost on me. Chloe did not speak to me for over a year. Leo and I had sparse, brittle conversations, stilted updates about work, the weather. The calls were short, and the silence between us on the line was louder than any words. I began the slow, patient work of rebuilding. Not just my savings, penny by penny, but myself. The dental office gave me a small raise. I took on a few extra hours. I sold some old jewelry Robert had given me, not out of need, but out of a desire to sever sentimental attachments to things. I found a quiet, steady contentment in my solitude. I missed my son with a physical, aching hollow, but I did not miss the feeling of being a beggar at the feast I'd helped pay for. I did not miss the constant hum of anxiety, the shrinking of my own spirit. Change, when it came, did not arrive with fanfare. It crept in on quiet feet. It started with a text on a gray, drizzly Thursday afternoon 8 months later. Remember that beef stew you used to make? The one with the carrots and the fluffy dumplings? It was from Leo. My heart clenched. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before replying. I remember. Do you still have the recipe? It's in my head. A pause, then. Could I come over sometime? Maybe you could show me? A month after that, he came over. Alone. He didn't bring flowers or a conciliatory bottle of wine. He brought a bag of groceries, a chuck roast, carrots, onions, a carton of broth. I thought, maybe we could cook it, he said, standing awkwardly in my doorway, not meeting my eye. We did. We stood side by side in my kitchen, the real heart of our home. We didn't talk about the wedding. We talked about the stew, how to brown the meat properly, how the secret to the dumplings was not to overmix the dough. We talked about a difficult project manager at his job, about the leaky faucet in his and Chloe's condo. He stayed for 3 hours. It was awkward, filled with long pauses, but it was tender. It was real. He washed the dishes. When he left, he hugged me. A real hug, not a stiff pat. Thanks, Mom, he murmured into my hair. He began to visit, tentatively at first, then settling into a pattern of every other Sunday afternoon. Sometimes Chloe came. She was polite, distant, bringing overly extravagant gifts, a cashmere throw, a box of imported chocolates. They felt like peace offerings from a foreign land, expensive, but missing the point entirely. After the 3rd time, I took Leo aside. Please ask Chloe not to bring gifts, I said quietly. They're very kind, but they aren't necessary. Her presence is enough. It was another boundary, gently but firmly drawn. 3 years have passed now. Leo is different. The sharp, anxious edges have softened. The constant performance of trying to fit into a mold too small for his soul has left its marks. But in the breaking, something more authentic has begun to grow back. He talks less about networking and more about a woodworking class he's taking. He and Chloe are in marriage counseling. I don't know the details, and I make it a point not to ask. Their marriage is their country. I am a respectful neighbor on the border. We have forged a new understanding, my son and I. It is not the effortless, symbiotic love of his childhood. It is something quieter, more respectful, and perhaps more durable. It is a love that has passed through fire. He knows, with a certainty he didn't have before, that my love for him is a constant, like gravity. But he also knows that my resources, My financial support, my emotional labor, my very presence are mine to give, and I will only give them where they are valued, not just utilized. He finally offered a real apology. It wasn't on a special occasion. It was on one of those ordinary Sundays while he was drying the stew pot. His back was to me, his voice almost lost in the sound of running water. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said to the soap suds, "for the kitchen chair, for all of it, for letting it happen." I put a wet, wrinkled hand on his shoulder and left it there. "I know," I said, and in those 2 words, I held the acceptance, the forgiveness, and the memory of the pain. It was enough. The moral of this long emotional story isn't about getting even. It's not a triumph of vengeance. It's about the profound realization that sometimes the strongest, most transformative action you can take is to stop paying, in every currency, for the privilege of your own neglect. It's about learning that love, real love, doesn't mean saying yes to every demand. Sometimes the most loving act is a quiet, calm no, delivered with a smile. That no isn't the end of a relationship. If the relationship is true, it can be the painful, necessary beginning of a new, more honest one. It is the sound of you teaching people, even those you love most, how to value you. If this calm, real-life story of family and quiet strength resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you tapped the like button, subscribed to the channel for more heartfelt narratives, and shared your own reflections in the comments below. Your stories and your presence are what make this a true community. Thank you for listening and for being here.